We're on YouTube. You're good to go.
Okay, very good. I'm going to call this meeting of the Government Ops Committee to order. It's now 11:32. I see we have a quorum. First thing is approval of minutes from our prior meeting. Do I have a motion for that by Mr. Conover, second by myself? All in favor? Opposed? Carried. We're a small group or a tough group. Okay. Discussion, let's go right to it. Referral, discussion about regarding a local law pertaining to the sale of fireworks. Do we have Mr. Dickinson on Zoom? No. He's been the one who's been the strong proponent of this, but I'm gonna, the fireworks law, he was asking that we rescind it. The mayor of Lake George, their board passed unanimously asking that we opt out of the law. We've had surveys sent out. We've had 60, 70 people at least respond to the surveys. Overwhelmingly, they would like it rescinded or the county opting out. I've read into the records both pro and con comments from that about 2 months ago. So I guess I'm going to open this up to the committee at this time. What is your preference? Do you want to move forward with a vote on this, a motion and a vote? Or do we not have a motion and a vote moving forward with this law? And obviously, if we moved it forward and it passed, it would be going to the full board. Mr. Conover, what's your thoughts?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just in terms of procedure, are we required to have a public hearing on this? Is this an amendment that requires a public hearing?
Yes, we're going to need a public hearing on this.
Public hearing. So, I mean, my feeling is I would prefer to leave the discussion of this in terms of its advisability to the proponents to make, but I think that at this stage, I would have no problem with going to a public hearing, hear from the public, hear from other people. If that's agreeable, I don't want to be, push the committee in this regard, but I don't see a problem with going to a public hearing to move this forward, and then the proponents and those that are not in favor can make their case, and then the board can decide. So at this stage, I would, I suppose that, we can opt out. There, as I remember, I don't have the law in front of me, but there's I think we remember 6 or 7 sections to that law. It might be possible that just as some of the sections are up, we opt out on, maybe 1 or 2 we keep. I don't know at this stage. So, but I would be, if it's agreeable to the committee and to the chairperson, setting a public hearing.
Okay. Other thoughts, Mr. Wild?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I am agreeing with the prior speaker. The only question is when the public hearing is, and I mentioned it at the board meeting last Friday, that it's difficult for the public to attend a public hearing at 10 o'clock in the morning on Friday. And I prefer also to have this meeting, public hearing, scheduled for the evening so that we can get a better representation of what the public is thinking about this. Because I really don't have a clear picture in my mind exactly what the public is thinking about this. And if we can do it in the evening, at least we can have the opportunity to hear more voices. And that's what I'm looking for. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Conover?
Yeah, I mean, if that's what's needed, I mean, we're all paid to serve, and if we need to be here in the evening, that's fine. I think I'm kind of recollecting exactly what the law says, but I believe that the law has 2 times on the calendar when these fireworks are available. One is generally speaking for New Year's, the other is for the 4th of July. People, business people have to order these things, etc. So we may be, pushing the January date here. I'm not sure. So I guess my primary question would be, when would this when would this become, assuming for the moment that this were adopted, when would it become the force of law? Maybe that's a question for Mr. Terwilliger. If it's not going to be force of law until sometime after New Year's, then fine, you know. If we're going to jump into people's business plans in the middle of their business plans, I'm not sure that that's such a good idea. But so I guess my question would be, if we held a public hearing, for example, just thinking out loud, if we held a public hearing in December, for example, and let's assume for the moment that if it were adopted in December, when would it become law?
Is that a question for our attorney?
Well, through you, Mr.
Okay, thank you. I'll ask that question. Go ahead, Mr.
Okay, thank
Wallinger, you can answer that.
I see the sale periods on it are June 1st, between June 1st and July 5th, and December 26th and January 2nd. So passing something in December might very well, for an effective date to take effect, might very well push into the new year. So you might very well have to make it take effect after January 2nd here, trying to think of the calendar as it looks. So it would be something then that would be affecting the sale periods that would normally occur June 1st and July 5th in 2022. But we might be missing the one this year. It's going to be just a little bit too close for the December 26th to January 2nd time period.
Mr. Conover?
Well, just to continue, and if we're going to be into next year, then I think that, you know, we're into a new board, we're into a new two-year cycle. It might be best at this stage to leave this on the table, Mr. Chairman, and maybe have the proponents think about some of those questions and in terms of timing and in terms of when it would become force of law if it were adopted. I just don't know, sitting here today, what the implications of that are.
Mr. Driscoll, then Chairwoman.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like permission to direct a question to the attorney.
Duly noted. Yes.
Okay, so I just want to be clear what I heard from Supervisor Conover. This affords us the opportunity to look at specific paragraphs or sections of the law, so that we may be good with A, B, and C, but not with D, E, and F. Am I correct in that, what I heard?
Mr. Twillinger, you can respond.
Yes, that was it. If the board wants to modify the law and change parts of it and keep parts of it, you definitely have the power to do that.
Okay, I just want to be clear on that.
You could rescind the whole law, or you could change it and modify it, and make some things different about it. You definitely have the power to do that.
Great, okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Okay, Chairwoman?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think these points that are being brought up are why it's exactly so important for it to go in front of the public and for us to make informed decisions based on that. I know we've received probably more emails and phone calls and inquiries about this topic than we have many other topics throughout the year. At this point, this has been on your agenda for several months. It would be nice to see if it could move forward to set a public hearing. But of course, as this vote comes forward to the board in November, to set a public hearing in December, after that public hearing is done, we may make those modifications that our current county attorney had just indicated. And to Supervisor Conover's well taken point, we could certainly then make that law be effective end of January, beginning of February. So it doesn't have any impact on the sales or a hardship on our businesses, but yet we're responding to the public concern and to the need. And of course, that's what we're here to do, is to hear those concerns. So I would just ask that after all these months of talking about it in this committee, if we could please move forward to set that public hearing so we can have a more informed discussion based on our public input.
Thank you. So what I'm hearing is, just a second, please, Mr. Wild. So what I'm hearing is some people would like a public hearing, obviously, in December. The chairman would like it in December. And whatever comes out of that, obviously, could, there's ton of options that could come out of that, but if it was to proceed in a different format, but it could be, the effective date could be after this, after that Christmas season, so it wouldn't affect businesses. Is that what I'm hearing? Okay, I just want to make sure it's clear in my mind. Mr. Wild?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Just for clarity, if we rescinded this law, it would be illegal to sell, purchase, and use sparklers. Is that true?
Mr. Twillinger?
Yes, the sparkling devices as they're described in the law here, as well as any of the kinds of fireworks that are banned and illegal under state law, except for where they're allowed by a permit process for like professional exhibits and things like that.
Does that help you, Mr.
Well,
Wild?
that helps me. You know, I'll just have to explain to my granddaughter why she can't use sparklers anymore.
Well, remember, they can be amended. So this, you know, Mr. Wild, this can be
Okay.
amended. So,
Right.
you know,
It could be.
yeah, Mr. Conover?
Yeah, as I say, I think there's at least 6 provisions within the law, one of which discusses sparklers as opposed to exploding devices. And I don't want to prejudge the process, but I'm not sure we could have any varieties. But I would be prepared to make a motion that we move this forward to a public hearing in December. And I'm not sure about having it in the evening, but if our normal board meeting, I suppose we could move our normal board meeting to 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock. Well, I forget what the time we usually have our evening meetings, but whatever that time I meant, Mr. Chairman, if you could just refresh my memory, when do we normally have those? What time do we normally have those meetings?
Which ones? The evening meetings? We've had it at 5 o'clock.
We used to have them at 4. We have had our workshops at 4, but board meetings we used to have at 6.
6.
So, if,
So you're suggesting that we do the whole board meeting?
well,
that
rather
evening,
than have
or do we have a
board
separate,
meeting.
or do we have a separate, Mr. Conover, a separate special meeting for the public to discuss this?
I hate to have a second board meeting, but I'm agreeable to anything. I'd like to hear from the other supervisors in this regard. If you want to move the December meeting to an evening meeting so that we can have a public hearing on this, would be one idea, or we would have a separate, a second meeting.
Mr. Conover, could I suggest that we could have a special government ops meeting, okay? Open to the public, obviously, for the public input. And that would be my recommendation, instead of having to call a special board meeting or to have it tied and change the board scheduling around, we could have a special operations evening meeting in December that I think would suffice everyone's concerns. Mr. McGowan, and then I think Mr. Driscoll, or did you have your hand up too? Okay, so Mr. McGowan first and then Mr. Driscoll.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Don't we have one coming up for the septic law in the evening? Could we piggyback onto that one? I mean,
Good point.
That's a good question. I'm going to ask Amanda.
So you just set the public hearings for those at the last board meeting. So those will be held on the 17th or the 19th. We don't have time to, you have to send this resolution authorizing the public hearing to the board. So that'll have to be done at the November meeting, which means you would set the public hearing for a following meeting.
not that,
You could do it on the 5th, but then you wouldn't have the 10 days to publish it. We wouldn't be able to meet a public noticing. You could do the special government ops meeting whenever you wanted to, but it's still going to have to be after the public hearing is authorized at the November board meeting.
Mr. Driscoll, then Mr. Wild.
Thank you, Chairman. As we've done often in the past, Mr. Lehman can do a nice job in getting that information out, a public information campaign to the media that people can use YouTube to attend the meeting. They can mail in or email in their comments and concerns, which will be recorded. So I think there's a lot of options to get that, to engage people and give them the opportunity to say their piece. And we should certainly, utilize all of those opportunities again, for the public to participate in the process.
Thank you, Mr. Driscoll. Mr. Wild?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think it's wise to try to figure out how to manage this from a board versus public hearing. My sense is that the septic public hearing may fill a room, just from some of the people I've been talking to. So I'm not sure it would make sense to kind of bring these both together at the same time and place. But I'm more than willing to support a committee meeting in the evening that we can get broadcast out, make sure the public knows about it, maybe get an article written in the paper saying that this is what we're considering, and the implications of what rescinding this law would do. I think that's important. So let's move forward if we can.
All right, so we would need to send this resolution to the board for them to authorize that we have a public hearing. Okay. From what I'm hearing, we'd like it to be a government ops special public hearing with the December, sometime in December date. Is everybody on board so far? Okay. So I will entertain a motion to send this to the full board, asking for a public public meeting from the Government Ops Committee for a December public meeting.
Then you'll have a second one at the regular board meeting in the morning.
Pardon me?
Then you want to have you'll have an evening one for government ops, and then you'll have your regular public hearing at the December board meeting. That's when you you finish up and decide what you're going to do with the resolution.
Yes,
So you'll have that with 2 public hearings.
yes. Okay, so do I have a motion for that? Motion by Mr. Conover, Mr. Wild, second. All in discussion. I think we've had some good discussion. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Okay, very good. Next item is referral from finance regarding the abandonment and cleanup of town of Johnsburg tax map, and to consider exploring the possibility of adopting a local law permitting the county to hold property owners of polluted properties who abandon them accountable and be entitled to recoup any money spent on cleanup efforts. I believe it was determined that the county attorney would review and determine what options, if any, were available to the county and provide an update at this meeting. So, Mr. Twillinger, can you give us an update on that?
I can give you a little bit of an update on it. I haven't had the time to look into it as much as I would have liked. What I've seen so far is, I think a more viable alternative for us is going in some ways as we have. If we have to use the existing state laws on it, other common law causes of action, if this polluting property is damaging county land, for example, if it was a neighboring property to county land, pursuing that way as a lawsuit against the owners of it, in cases where federal law applies, using that to go after the parcels on it. Also, too, it's using our own environmental testing fund, which was also modified to allow for cleanup as well. I mean, these, I think, would be more efficient to go that way than to try to put our own local law into effect and have the risk of, what do they call it? When
Being
you're
challenged?
well, not just being challenged, but where you have it where the state and the federal government have done so much regulation this way, you run against the question of, have they, in a sense, precluded everybody else or any other municipalities from being able to even regulate this matter, because they're the ones that are doing it and regulating it. And if you're trying to duplicate or in a bit contradict what they're doing, you're in the wrong. So I would say at this point, let's go with the mechanisms we do have available if we need to. I'd like to keep this as a research project. I've got a couple others that I'm looking into, so I'm not wanting to close the book on it yet. If you'd like me to keep looking into it, I'd like to. But at this point right now, I would have to say, let's go with the mechanisms we have in place already for it.
Okay, so Mr. Conover, you're good with that?
Very good with that.
Okay, so at this, Mr. McGowan, would you like to make a comment?
Yes, thank you. I just want to make sure, I see what Mr. Twilliger is saying, and I agree. I don't want to step on any feet, but I want to make sure that we are able to go along. Now, for this particular property up there, New York State is not allowing us to do any pursuing, are they? Mr. Twillinger?
On this
Well,
one,
to Mr. Chairman. Question for Mr. Twillinger. I'm speaking to the chair.
Your question was directed towards me. Well, I'll direct it towards Mr. Twillinger.
okay, thank you. On this one, yeah, what's unique about this one is the state has already done a lot of the cleanup work on it and things like that. There's a little bit going on now. It's come before the committee for some contracts, like with Atlantic Testing to do some work on the property and that with it. And also made an arrangement with the spill compensation fund. That's also been approved as well, to have a agreement where the county is going to work with the town of Johnsburg. And the county's has already paid $15,000 into it. The state is into it for $165,000 on it. And we were hoping that the state would have kind of allowed us to, in a sense, piggyback with them on things, and they didn't, which I was disappointed in that, but they didn't. So for this one, and then the question is, who do you go after on it to get cleanup? You know, that's what makes it almost impossible or hard to do on this one, is who you're going to go after. And if the state's going to try to go after them too,
They get first
they're
dibs.
going to get,
Well, that was kind of what was my question was, is, can we, how do we set it up so we're able to go with the state and the state just doesn't push it out? Because, yes, the state has funds into it and we have funds. Now, the state budget is much larger than our budget. So, the equality of money might be the same percentage. So we should be able to get our money back too for the county. So, how do we do that so we can go along with the state when the state, steps in? I just want to protect all the taxpayers, but my main concern is to stop this type of behavior where we pollute land and then just walk away from it and expect other people to clean up. That's what bothers me the most.
Mr. Twillinger, would you like to make a final comment on this?
no, I was thinking about that too. And one of the things with this parcel that was unique is that it went on for a long time of not paying taxes and taxes being owed and accumulating year after year after year. And because the land was contaminated or polluted in ways, the county was reluctant to foreclose on it and take that over because of the strict liability in state law that if you buy this land and acquire it and it's polluted, you can become liable for it too, just because now you own it. And the county was very reluctant to do that. And it went on for years and years and years. I would have to say one is anymore, being the county has this pollution, the environmental testing and cleanup fund, which is a great thing to have for it. Maybe don't let it go on for years and years and years. If there's a parcel that we know or believe is probably contaminated like this, don't let it owe taxes for decades before we do something about it, so that there's, in a sense, less money lost as far as tax revenue that's lost and forsaken by not foreclosing on the property when it has some value to it, and getting it to be able to clean it up and do something before it gets more and more expensive.
It's excellent advice. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Twillinger. Thank you, Mr. McGowan. Okay, so you continue your research on that. I appreciate it, and we'll
Definitely, thank
bring it up again for discussion as we continue down that road. The last item on here is the information that Supervisor Bruno brought last month. Actually, he brought it 2 months ago, regarding a constitutional county, a mission statement. And I will turn the floor over to Supervisor Bruno.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I think it was, excuse me, last month, doesn't matter, that I submitted this for consideration. And it was my hope that everyone would review this. I'm sure you have. But so anyway, what this, there are two parts here, as Chairman stated. One is what Cattaraugus County did in declaring themselves, quote, constitutional county. The other part is the mission statement. Now, Warren County doesn't have a mission statement, my understanding. And I personally think it's important that you have one. Having been in business, and a lot of companies and other entities have a mission statement, and I think it's important to let people know what you stand for, what your mission is. So I think the county should have one. Now, regarding the constitutional county, that statement, that could be incorporated in the mission statement, and in discussions with Supervisor Conover and Supervisor Beatty, came to a consensus that it would be, well, let me back up. When you take the oath of office, you swear to uphold the Constitution of the United States. So this may be a little redundant. We've already done that. So maybe the statement that Warren County is a constitutional county is not, I don't want to diminish it, not as important, but it could be incorporated into a mission statement. My suggestion is that maybe you have the county administrator look at a couple other counties, their mission statements, and put something together. We don't need to reinvent the wheel, as they say, and this isn't that onerous. I mean, mission statements are not generally lengthy documents. They're a couple paragraphs usually. And I think it helps clarify to, not us, Board of Supervisors knows what we're about, but people on the outside looking in, as they say, see a mission statement, and it helps them to understand more what the Board of Supervisors is about. So if you take a couple of other counties, maybe look at their mission statement and maybe try to fashion something from those and then present it to this committee to see if we move forward. Does that sound reasonable?
That sounds like a very good suggestion. I'm going to ask our committee if they have thoughts. Mr. Conover?
Yeah, I like that approach very much. I know it's another item on your list, Ryan, but, and then,
You don't have enough to do.
and
Ryan.
then, and maybe, Rachel, Madam Chairwoman, maybe if it's not too lengthy and we like it, then maybe it could be like the preamble to our board rules, for example. There could be like a preamble going into our rules, which I think could be a good thing as well. So I think there's merit to this, and I think we should take a look at what others doing, and let's bring it back and see what we have.
Chairwoman?
Thank you. Yes, to Supervisor Conover's point, I think that when we started looking at the rules of the board again in depth throughout this year, that was certainly a need in terms of a mission statement. And I appreciate Supervisor Bruno bringing it to this committee's attention, which is appropriate. And certainly Ethan at the planning department, he brought this up a few months ago, that in fact, it would be nice to have a revised, well, in this case, a creation of a mission statement that would look at our comprehensive plan that we had from years ago, as we've talked about updating it. But just to start with something small, which would be a common mission statement of this board to our community. And that is something that many counties do have. It could be posted on the website and part of our official documents. And perhaps we could ask the planning department, particularly Ethan, to engage in that draft and dialogue with Supervisor Bruno and County Administrator Moore to bring back a suggestion to this committee. And hopefully before the end of the year, we would have a mission statement that this entire board could agree upon.
Okay, any other discussion on this? Mr. Wild?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm in agreement. A suggestion, our committee assignments, our committee lists. I'd like to offer a suggestion to say, have our department heads put together 2 or 3 sentences about their mission that we can think about incorporating also to help guide us in terms of where we're going. But again, I don't believe that we should put a burden on any of our staff. They have enough to do and they're doing good jobs. But if they have the opportunity to give us, or maybe some input to this group that are going to be developing the statement and researching the statement, I think that would be helpful. Thank you.
Okay, so I think what I'm hearing is that we'd like to ask Mr. Moore to put together some preliminary mission statements that he could bring to this committee. We could have a further discussion on that. Is that correct? Is anybody in objection to that? Okay, so let's do that, Mr. Moore, if you would. We're not under any time crunch or anything like that. And, but Supervisor Bruno has an excellent recommendation that we start kind of getting a direction of the county via a mission statement. And that can include, obviously, a number of different things. We've all worked in the private sector, and mission statements can range from two sentences to a page. I've seen them, it's all dependent on the business, but we're a county. And so give us a starting point and I'd appreciate it. Mr. Moore, would you like to say something?
Sure. I mean, this is an interesting exercise and it'll be worthwhile, I believe, for us to do it. I have some thoughts, already as to some of the principles that we try to live up to here. They obviously providing services, particularly for those that are in the most need in our communities, doing so in a way that is responsible with dollars that are not our own, doing so in a manner that is ethical and respectful. I think those may be some of the broad points that we would like to hit on.
Excellent.
There you are.
Excellent. Okay. I'll take privilege of the floor. Everybody calm down over there.
Thank
Oh,
you.
there's
Chair. By
somebody
the way,
there.
thank you.
Okay. You're more than welcome, Supervisor. Mr. Wild, did you have another comment?
Yeah, something else that has come up from time to time, and I don't want this to be controversial, but the majority and minority leaders have led to a lot of discussions that we've had here, and I understand the basis, the reason to make it to do the compensation from a legality standpoint. I understand the principle there, but it's been brought up a couple of times that we could request the legislature, the New York State Legislature, to allow us to compensate the roles that we had done previously instead of having a majority and minority leader. Myself personally, I know there's a perception of what these leaders do within the public. Maybe they don't realize that there's not been one Republican caucus for us to talk about what we want since the beginning. So it's somewhat misleading in terms of the way it's presented. So what I would like to request is that we start to pursue the New York State Legislature to allow us to have home rule to define the compensation packages that we had previously and create an opportunity for us to do that. I know it's going to take some time, but I'd like for us to pursue that. And I'm just hoping that someone else on the committee might help support that.
Mr. Connor?
Yeah, I mean, that's an option and I'm sorry. It's an option and perhaps once again, what we could do, I think it would require probably, do they call it a home rule message, or it would require some type of action that would then go there. But if we could have our staff put on one sheet of paper the specific acts that would be required, I assume it would include even a public hearing, and also commit it to some kind of timeline. We could be talking about, a bit of time here, so it would be good to kind of see all this put in front of us so that we know what Mr. Wild is saying, that we know exactly what we need to do, when we need to do it, and then if we need to do it, I mean, that will be decided by the board at large at the appropriate point in time, but exactly what the steps would be to do this. I know I think I know some of the elements, but I'm not sure that I understand fully how that fits on a timeline, and these things have to be in Albany by a certain date. And I mean, there's, which is to your point, which is, what acts are required and when do they have to be required by, and that kind of thing. When do we have to get this to Albany? That kind of thing. Thank you.
Okay, all right. Any further discussion? Okay, seeing none, I will call to adjourn. Motion to adjourn, second. All in
Are
favor?
we, I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, are we taking action on that? to ask
There's
our
no
attorney-
action to take right
that
now.
We're going to ask the attorney to look into this and put something else on his list in terms of what it takes to make it happen?
I think that my understanding,
Go ahead, Mr. Connell.
my understanding is that the request has been made. Our leadership, our staff is sitting right here. I think they understand the instruction. I mean, we can,
Is that what is that what we're being asked to do?
I guess you're being asked to look into it. So they will look into it.
Thank you.
I can, go ahead, Mr. Moore.
What exactly is the ask? Is it for us to be allowed to pay a vice chair stipend, or is it a broader ask than that?
I believe that's the request, is, if I understood Mr. Wild, is to have the home rule message that if it were approved by the board, I mean, there's a lot of ifs here, Brian.
Mhm.
If it were approved by the board, would authorize us to be able to have the chairman of finance, who would also be the deputy chairperson, receive a stipend. And like I say, I think I know some of the elements here in terms of the process and when it would have to be in Albany and
Mhm.
all of that kind of stuff. But all of that is contingent on, that's just information. I mean, it's going to be contingent on the board determining that that's what they wish to do. And I would assume that, but I don't think we could really seriously consider that until we know exactly what's involved.
Well, personally, I'm pleased that the board followed the law this year and voted overwhelmingly to approve of the majority and minority positions. It was a vote of 18-1. So that was overwhelming confidence in those positions and following the law, which the county attorney at the time, Ms. Cassane, said the law clearly stated that it had to be majority minority. So I was very pleased that that was followed and that the board overwhelmingly wanted the law to be followed correctly. I know personally I've chaired more committees than anybody on the board, so I can tell you that it's been a great year so far, and I like the input. So without any further ado,
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, if I may just make one more comment about that. If I had the opportunity to change my vote that I made in January, I would have changed my vote.
okay, thank you. Motion to adjourn. Motion second by me.